Okay, so anybody that knows the Bible, anybody that studies it, I need your help
All right, let's see it.
on a verse. Okay, so John 1:42 says, he brought him to Jesus. Jesus looked at him and said, "You are Simon, the son of John. You shall be called Cephas," which means Peter. Okay, what got my attention was Jesus said, "son of John." But then if you go to Matthew 16:17, Jesus says in 17, and Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon, Bar Jonah, exclamation point, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in you." Okay, so I know it's the same person, but why is Jesus saying Bar Jonah in Matthew 16:17, but then Jesus says John is the father of Simon in John 1:42? Like, is it just like a translation error or what?
So this is a great question. It is not a matter of translation, but of textual criticism. And this is a part of compiling and translating the Bible that a lot of people are not very aware of. But in order to learn more about this, we're going to have to go to a critical edition of the Greek New Testament. And this one is the Nestle Aland 28, or the 28th edition of the Nestle Aland. And I'm just going to show you the page that has John 1:42 on it. We're going to zoom in on a couple of things here. So first, we're going to look at the red box. This has verse 42 in it. And if you look down in the lower left part of the red box, you can see what looks like an I, a W, an A, and then a VVOU. And this is Greek for Ioannou, or of John. And so this is Simon, the son of John. But you'll see that just to the upper left of the uppercase I with a little apostrophe by it, you have the number 1 and then what looks like a little corner of a bracket. And what that means is there's a text critical issue here. And so look down in the critical apparatus, which is the footnotes, for a discussion of what's going on there. And if we go down to the critical apparatus, I'm first going to show you in this red box, it shows the main variant reading. And a variant reading is where there are other manuscripts that say something different. Now, the editors of this particular critical edition of the New Testament decided that they wanted John to be the reading they put in the text. And then the variant reading says Jonah. And after Jonah, which is what looks like an IWVA, you have a bunch of symbols, and that represents different manuscripts. So A represents Alexandrinus, B represents Vaticanus, and so on. And some of them are letters, some of them are Greek letters, some of them are numbers. You even have a Gothic-looking M there. And so there are a bunch of manuscripts that say Jonah. But when you look at those manuscripts, they're actually pretty late. And so let's take a look at the first one that has the symbol A. That's Alexandrinus. So here is the column from the page of Alexandrinus that has John 1:42. And in the red box, I have the Greek for Jonah. Now, this is a 5th century CE manuscript. So this is from well after the composition of the Gospel of John. So if we go back to the critical apparatus, now this red box shows 2 other readings. First, we have Ioanna, which is something that's only found in a couple of manuscripts. And that is actually a confusion for a woman's name, Joanna, which is found in the Gospel of Luke. I think Luke 8:4 and 24 something. You have a reference to Ioanna, and this is kind of splitting the difference. It's confusing Ioannou of John and Jonah. And so that's a confusion. But then you have what looks like 2 vertical dashes, like a pipe with a gap in the middle, and then you have the abbreviation in italics TXT. And that means text, and that means here are the manuscripts that agree with the reading that we put in the main text. So here are the manuscripts that have son of John. And we have Papyrus 66, 75, 106, and then you have the Hebrew character Aleph, which represents Codex Sinaiticus. You have Vaticanus, the original. So rather than the altered or the revised Vaticanus, this is what Vaticanus originally read. And then you have a few other manuscripts, and Itco means Italian codices. That's like a handful of Latin manuscripts. And so these are the manuscripts that read John. And here is P66, one of our earliest manuscripts that preserves this passage in the Gospel of John. And in the red box, it's a little hard to see, but you have Ho Huios Ioannou, and then Huios is abbreviated to the first letter and the last letter, Epsilon and Sigma, with a line over the top. And so the reason that the editors chose to put John in the main body of the text is because that's the reading that is found in the earliest and most reliable manuscripts, and we can explain quite easily why scribes would have changed it from John to Jonah, and that's precisely because in Matthew 16:17 it reads Jonah. And so as scribes are collecting these manuscripts and comparing John to Matthew, they're like, wait a minute, it says over here his name's Jonah. Let's change what we have in this manuscript. And so you have a tendency towards harmonization as manuscripts continue to be copied and proliferated, but you don't really have a good explanation for how it would have gone from Jonah to John. And so when you apply the text critical principles, when you apply what we notice about how manuscripts change and are altered by scribes as they are transmitted, there's a far stronger argument for the originality of John that was later altered to read Jonah, rather than the originality of Jonah that was later altered to read John. And so the editors of this particular critical edition of the New Testament said, you know what? John probably had John in there, probably called Simon the son of John, and later on scribes were like, well, let's harmonize it with Matthew, and so they changed it to Jonah. And so we have just two different traditions about who Simon's father was. Whoever put together the Gospel of John thought that Simon was the son of John. Whoever put together the Gospel of Matthew thought that Simon was the son of Jonah. Now, Matthew was probably put together before John, and so it may represent an earlier tradition. It may just represent a different tradition. We can't really know for sure, but that is the reason that we have these different readings between these different books of the New Testament.
The only translation that I can find in John 1:42 that says Jonah is the King James Version. Every single other translation is saying the name John. So I don't know, I'm confused. They can't find anything. I don't know. But these are Jesus's words, so that's why I'm paying attention. Like, yeah. If anybody can help me out with this, I would really appreciate it.
So the reason the King James Version is the only version that reads Jonah is because pretty much all other English translations of the Bible are going to be based on more recent, more up-to-date, more scholarly critical editions of the New Testament, like the version that I showed you, the NA28, or you also have UBS 4 or 5, which is United Bible Societies. So the King James Version was a revision of the Bishop's Bible, and it was published in 1611. And when they went to their source text, they were using a critical edition of the Greek New Testament that was based on one that was put together only the century before by a Dutch humanist scholar named Desiderius Erasmus. And he went to his library in Switzerland and said, give me all your best Greek New Testament manuscripts. And his first edition of his Greek New Testament, which was the first one that was ever published, relied on 7 manuscripts. Since Erasmus's version of the Textus Receptus, we've discovered literally thousands of Greek New Testament manuscripts, many of them much earlier than the manuscripts to which Erasmus had access. And so the Textus Receptus is the first attempt to put together a critical edition of the New Testament, and for its time, it was an amazing work of scholarship. However, we have much better, much earlier manuscripts now, and we have refined the art of textual criticism to the degree that we are much more confident in our text critical decisions now. And so the source text that was used to revise the Bishop's Bible to give us the King James Version's New Testament is slightly different from the source text that scholars use today. And the source text that scholars use today is a much better one. And so the King James Version, in that regard, is not the best translation in the world. And in fact, if you look in most new translations of the New Testament today, you're going to find places where verses are just taken out. Like Matthew 17:21, for instance. In virtually all modern translations of the New Testament, it's just not there, although it will usually be placed in the footnotes. And the reason is because when we got all these other Greek New Testament manuscripts and we started going through and comparing everything, we noticed that there were about 16 or so verses in the New Testament that were just not in the earliest manuscripts, and they were probably added by scribes later on, doing the same kind of thing that scribes did when they changed John in John 1:42 to Jonah. They were trying to harmonize. They were trying to correct. Only what they were doing was altering the manuscripts. And we have now tried to correct those alterations where we have found them. And this is why there are about 16 verses that will usually just not be in the main body of most modern translations of the New Testament. So nothing nefarious going on here. It's just different traditions between the Gospel of John and the Gospel of Matthew, and the King James Version was based on an earlier attempt to cobble together a Greek New Testament, and we have much more reliable critical editions of the Greek New Testament today, so the translations of the New Testament are going to be much better, much more reliable today. And the fit for this video has been Wolverine in his correct costume.